Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar from Asia Talent Mobility Alliance, it's ATMA. This is a webinar focused on the India Global Mobility Program. It's been almost more than half of the year of 2024 over. We thought it was a good time to get a good sense of how, as global mobility leaders, managing our own global mobility programs in India. Before we go, just want to share the agenda with you. Yeah. So the agenda today we want to talk about is what's happening in the world of global mobility policy in terms of, are we seeing any developments over the last 6 to 9 months for policy? What are the trends on the volume of moves across organizations? What's the regulatory environment and compliance world giving us the challenges which we have today? And finally, we also want to talk about how have we progressed on the technology adoption to manage our global mobility processes and policies. Before we proceed ahead, a word on ATMA. As you know, the Asia Talent Mobility Alliances. We are here to enhance. Our main vision is to uh, enhance the innovation and the development of the talent mobility of Asia. Our mission is to be the authority on talent mobility for the governments and businesses in Asia. We want to provide support to all our mobility professionals and stakeholders throughout Asia by facilitating communication, education, community, and advocacy. We want to reflect, embrace, and promote the distinctiveness of the Asian countries, cultures, industries, and the individuals within the framework of talent mobility. Our four central pillars of ATMA. First is ESG and sustainability, then advocacy, education, and development. A lot of work is happening across all these pillars. I definitely want to call out about ESG and the current focus on helping the global mobility professionals in Asia to help understand ESG and the role of global mobility. We also have another webinar on the 22nd of July at 3 p.m. Singapore time on ESG and the role of global mobility, where Sean Collins from ATMA will be in conversation with Stephen Park from Schneider Electric to educate our participants on how we can incorporate the ESG fundamentals and ESG policies in our global mobility processes. Coming over to the panelists for today, we first have Subramani Soman. He is an experienced HR professional with over more than 2 decades of experience. He's worked across all the marquee brands in IT space, especially IBM, Capgemini, Oracle, TCS, and currently he's a strategic HR business partner for ATOS. He brings a strong stakeholder perspective from the HR leadership side in terms of his expectations from global mobility and how global mobility is helping the HR leadership in managing their goals as well. So thank you, Subbu, for your time and our commitment to ATMA. We also have with us Chiranjeevi Kumar Kopula, or known as Chiru. He's the head of global mobility at State Street. Prior to State Street, he spent 13 years at Deloitte, specializing in global mobility consulting, compliance, and US individual tax. He also has a distinctive experience of a 3-year assignment to the United States. So therefore, he is no longer not only a global mobility leader, he has been an assignee himself. So we are having a panel of all over to bring across an all-round insights into the world of global mobility from a stakeholder, from a global mobility leader, and an assignee perspective as well. So thank you, Chiru, as well, for your time and commitment for ATMA.
Thank you, Dharmesh.
Moving over to the global mobility policy, as I said, first we will talk about what has changed in the world of global mobility policy. So to start with, we hear a lot of articles written about having more and more flexibility in the global mobility policy to help the assignees in terms of their challenges or to address needs of different kinds of assignees. So would love to hear your views on what has been the demand from the organizations in terms of the global mobility policy changes and how are we addressing that? Can I start with Subbu?
Thank you, Dharmesh, and thank you everyone for joining and spending your time here. Maybe this 40 minutes would help all of us to get something back home. So policy, when we talk about policy, Dharmesh, so there is there has been a traditional mobility all along, but I think the COVID, which is a kind of a speed breaker or is a kind of a distinction where we have a lot of changes happening across organizations, and mobility is one of them. And mobility is one of the key impact on that because when you stop everything, and particularly people flying across and going to different countries, that's where we take a larger hit. But I think coming out of that, we have a lot of changes happening in the mobility space, so which is like the kind of assignments that used to be and how we see it now, the duration of assignments and the purpose of assignments. So all of this are taking a kind of an overhaul in terms of like, do we have to do it in the same way, or do we have to look at a new way? For example, a lot of business trips which used to happen, which we may, I mean, after COVID and after the remote working, we see that, do we need that many, right? That's a good thought that every organization is taking, which also gives a lot of value in terms of cost saving for the company. And also when you talked about the ESG, decarbonization and all that, which is also a greater impact there in terms of lesser flying anyway. So yes, so we see a kind of a shrink in the business travel, or it's been used for the particular reason as what it's meant for, because that's one of the most misused category, that everyone in mobility know about, whether how companies used to use it. So it's now more meant for the top management and the people who really want to travel for a meeting. Otherwise, things happens remotely. Likewise, the assignment duration as well, that from a whether it's a very short duration, like about 3 months to 4 months, where you have a knowledge transfer, transition, and all that, or you have a long-term assignment, which is for a very, very long durations. But we see a lot of hybrid now where people go for 6 months to 18 months, which is like particularly meant for a short-term assignment, and that's particularly temporary. That is the key point, because many companies used to rotate people, keep the role constant, but the people are temporary, which is again not a temporary assignment. You are completely permanently keeping that role, which is not the idea of mobility. So those kind of things are coming and changing, which is for a good reason. And also the first point of yours about the assignment benefits, which is core versus flex, which is also taking a good point, because core something is like anything that is got to do with compliance and regulatory, where you just don't have more choice. You need to keep them, you need to give them. But whereas flex is something like those are the benefits which can differ on case to case, not on case to case basis, maybe on a category to category, to see what really works for somebody, what may not really work for someone else. It could be a country combination, home and host country combination, or it could be a project level decision, or based on the margins that the projects make. Because some projects have a lot of money to spend and where you don't have enough people to be deployed. So those kind of the benefits, which when you keep it flexible, that really helps. There is no one size fits all approach, particularly when it comes to mobility. I'll just take a pause here. I have Chiru to come in, and then we can
Yeah,
probably dive in deep.
no,
Sure.
definitely. First of all, thanks, Dharmesh, and thanks, Atma, for having me here, and for all the participants, welcome, and thanks for your time today. All right. So yeah, going back to the flexibility, right? As Subbu mentioned, COVID has definitely changed, the way mobility, operated and now operating. So what happened after the COVID, there is a lot of importance on employee well-being, and also, of course, duty of care has been there as part of mobility, as part of broader HR. But then now there is a lot more emphasis on employee engagement and employee well-being as well. So because of that, more and more flexibility is allowed in policies, and if it's not directly in the policies, but those are now being managed through exceptions. But again, I mean, there is it's an undeniable agreement that one size does not fit all, right? Again, it depends on projects, it depends on industry and destination profiles, as Subbu mentioned, right? And also assignee demographics. But then what we need to understand here is that having core and flex benefits definitely help. Another important point is managing the costs, right? It helps manage the program costs, but then there are also other approaches being taken these days One is, involving hiring managers and HRBPs in the decision-making process, because the hiring manager and HRBPs are, much more closer to the employee situation, and business has the control over the costs as well. So that's one approach. And another approach, what we have been witnessing, is that you have a global policy framework to have that consistency, but also have a local adaptations in addition to the global policy framework. So in that way, you maintain the consistency at the high level, at the top level, but also have a flexibility, to the mobility professionals and business managers, based on that employee specific requirements. So
Sure.
that's what happening in terms of flexibility.
Right. Uh, Coming back to the next big topic, and something which we experienced when the remote work started, is about ownership of remote work policy, right? There was obviously the initial phase was all about mobility team helping HR to kind of draft a policy to understand how we can operationalize it and how we can approve those requests coming our way. Now, with some time and things having been settled, is there still a debate about who should own the remote work policy? Is it the HR or is it the global mobility team? So I'll first ask the HR leadership to kind of put their view on this topic.
Sure. I think when it comes to mobility, normally mobility takes the call because it has a lot of legality. That's one. But the problem with that is it's a combination of legality between the home and the host country. So where what you can do with a particular combination, say for example, India to France, you may not be able to do the same thing with maybe Germany to the US. So it is always mobility who takes the call when it comes to the policy, and that's particularly on the compliance. Whereas in this kind of hybrid model of work from home or work from anywhere for this matter, when it comes to mobility, it's not that easy or simple or straightforward to take a call, because more in many countries you may create a permanent establishment if the employee is based out of not based out of the host country or on a third country. So remote working or having someone working from one country and generating revenue to another is always problematic, and when you look at it from a taxation perspective, it is going to have a major issue. So I think it may not the hybrid model may not work very well when it comes to mobility. It can to an extent or to the threshold what is permissible within that country combination, but it may not be a very long term or sustainable model, or it will not have a longer life is what I think.
Got it. What do you, Chiru?
See, I think global mobility is in a much better position in terms of handling these remote work policies, right? Because if you look at it, global mobility team, it's kind of that I would say the force to bring different departments together, right? As Subha mentioned, there are so many complexities and legalities involved with the remote work, whether it's domestic or whether it's international, right? But then mobility, has been working with, they have kind of established relationships with your payroll departments, right? With your finance and with your corporate tax, right? And also you often talk to your compliance and legal. So I feel the mobility, function is in much better place to kind of, own and administer these remote work policies. And also another point of view, if you look at it, since the traditional global mobility work is reducing, this is the way, where global mobility still, can showcase that relevance, to the stakeholders and to the top management.
Right. I think we covered first two bullet points to some extent over there. Talking about virtual assignments for non-revenue roles. So I think what we have been hearing right now is that we actually have requests coming from the business side for people who are not revenue generating to, let's say, work remotely in their home location instead of getting deployed to some other country, which used to happen in the earlier phase. So do you want to also address this point as well? I mean, I'm seeing a lot of a few questions coming on the chat as well, and we will take that as well as we go along. But I mean, any take on virtual assignments? I mean, how have you managed such requests coming your way about having people to work from India for, let's say, a client who's based out of some other country, but then the work is non-revenue generating, so it may not create so much of a PE exposure or a tax exposure in India.
Maybe I can go on that.
Sure.
See, from my experience, right, what I have seen is that, I know we think about permanent establishment, but then there are, other aspects beyond permanent establishment issue, right? So if somebody is working remotely, I mean, the virtual assignment is nothing but, and I can say maybe another type of remote work, right? You would have to look into a couple of issues. One is transfer pricing, and another one is, if there are any outsourcing arrangements between that host and home country, and also the intra-company arrangements, right? If you don't have those, documents or agreements are in place, again, based on the industry, if you are highly regulated, industry or company, right, you may run into problems. So my caution is that, to the extent, even if it is not a revenue generating role, we would have to really consider, all these, I would say in one way, not so check boxes, but then we really need to have a dialogue with, again, your corporate tax and transfer pricing specialists to understand, and also legal to understand whether that can be done or not, right? Because it may look like that, okay, virtual assignment, we are not moving the employees, so there may not be any issue of any permanent establishment or any other sorts, right? But then there are other factors we need to consider. So that's my take on virtual assignment. So we need to apply caution.
True. True. I think I would totally align with what Chiru mentioned. And definitely it will be reviewed on case to case basis. It's not going to be like it can never be a policy in my mind.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whatever can work in a particular situation, maybe for a particular duration, and that's just for that case. And when you see someone else again coming with the same request, you're going to see it again completely as a new request and see whether it will work or not.
Got it. Thank you. I think we'll take the first question, which has come on the core flex policies. That how are you ensuring that the equity of support and experience is being delivered in a core flex world, where the line managers can use the same core flex as a negotiation tool? Any practical experience on
No,
that?
absolutely. That's a very, very kind of a scary point when it comes to core versus flex. Anything that is flex, people can use it at their own discretion. Yeah, that's a risk. Definitely, we run on that risk. But how do we keep that? Then I'll give you an example. So, in one of the organizations I work for, we have generally in one situations where we have people are open to travel. For example, India to Europe. There's no problem of getting resources there. Whereas we had another project towards Saudi where it's very, very difficult to attract talent there. People are not interested going there. And when it comes to projects in Europe, they have very restricted margins, whereas that's not the case with Saudi. They have a pretty good margin. They're ready to spend money on the people, but the people are not ready to go. So
Right.
when we build the policy, we have to look at what really works for Europe may not be the same for Saudi. So we have
Right.
to build a new policy which is more rewarding to the employee. It's more attractive, whereas that won't be the case for the Europe because that's already attractive in a different way.
That's a
So this is
that's a great example.
yeah, it's a one way of looking at core versus flex. It's the policy, but it's not the same template everywhere. Likewise, when you apply it, for example, you give a certain benefit to say that an X amount of relocation is allowed, whereas the definition of that X or that's the maximum cap you keep. But then probably for a single, it can be different. For a family of married with one or two children, it can be different. So you might have differentiations there, whereas ensuring that people don't play around with it, and that's a key point. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, just to add another flavor to it, right? I think there should be very good balance between core and flex. So I was recently in one of the conferences, I think it's a couple of months back. So during the discussion, somebody told me that, um, in their company, most of the assignees are maybe at the junior level staff, right? They opt for all the flex and they opt for the cash, right? So we also need to see whether that would actually help, in kind of achieving the objectives of the assignment, right? Again, we don't want individuals to, spend their last month before moving and first month after moving in sorting out logistics, but we need them to kind of, concentrate on their responsibilities and, just hit the ground working, right? Sometimes. So that also we need to consider, right? It cannot, you need to have those guardrails to make sure everything is balanced.
Okay. Any impact of the hybrid work model on global mobility policy? Any reactions on that? Because I think
I,
hybrid is now the new normal, so it'd be
I,
interesting to
I, I think it's definitely, put a lot of burden, stress on mobility teams, and it's keeping mobility teams busy. I mean, being busy is good thing these days. So one example is that we may think that, okay, hybrid work, how does it impact mobility? But then imagine the individuals who are working on a visa in a particular country, right, where you mention a particular office address or city address in their visa application, but then now the individual works from a different place, or maybe 100% works from home. So that also, for perfect example, of course, this is applicable for India, but also if you look at globally, right? You would have to amend the H-1B applications, write petitions if there is a change in the address. Even that's applicable in India as well. If assignee or the particular individual changes the office location or home location from what is mentioned in the resident permit. So that's one particular example where mobility teams kind of get pulled into and need to sort out these issues.
Anything, Subbu, are you saying the incorporation of ESG fundamentals in global mobility policy is a demand from the HR leadership?
It is. I think it's organization, not really organization, but also industry wide. It's one of the key points that you cannot just ignore. So, and particularly when it comes to mobility, it's very tricky because if you have to stand with ESG or decarbonization, you just have to stop mobility because you know you make people fly, which is one of the biggest in terms of carbonization, right? But then yeah, how better can you use it or where you can apply it is what matters. So for example, avoiding unnecessary travel, which is quite cost saving for the company and also for the decarbonization. So anything that is how you wisely use mobility is in itself is a big thing or the big greatest contribution to towards ESG.
Got it. Chiru, from your side?
Yeah, I mean, again, I do agree that ESG is no longer a soft issue, and then it is one of the business practices that can contribute positively to the improved company performance, right? But at the same time, I feel that there has not been much consideration given to ESG in mobility space. I know now it's catching up, and from what I witnessed is that more and more companies have an overarching sustainability strategy, and then the procurement teams would like vendors, of course, including the mobility vendors, to provide information about their distribution channels and diversity slate. But I think a lot more to come on ESG when it comes to mobility space.
Great. About the India growth story, I think, do you see any organizations or, around when you talk in your network about more and more senior professionals who have either a PIO card holder or Indian citizens wanting to come back to India to take up senior leadership roles, given overall an external environment which is a little bit tight on economy these days?
Do you want to go first? Or
Yeah, I don't. I mean, so to be frank, I don't see that much. And I always believe it's more business driven. So even in one of my organizations, we had such leadership people, and particularly the the ones from the Europe moving to India to set up certain things. And that always happens due to the business requirements. So, for example, you're setting up a new GDC, you're setting up a new team in the organization where you want to grow India. So those things would happen. But I particularly have not seen that kind of a movement of Indians returning to India,
Okay.
which I've not seen much unless there is a particular
I,
business business driver or more incentives coming on that way. Rather, I see the other way. I mean, I see a lot of people willing to go, which is
That's always
outside
been
of
the
India.
case. Yeah,
yeah.
that's always been
It's
the case.
always been the case, yes.
Well, I have a slightly different view on this. I mean, again, I have not seen much, but then I did notice that because of this, global capability centers, and then the importance given on the global roles. Yeah, I have seen a little uptick in the PAO, I mean OCA card holders or Indian citizens, wanting to come back, and also particularly for the past 1.5 years or 2 years, there was also a lot of uncertainty in some of the world economies. That also kind of driven these individuals to look for the roles again at the senior level to come back to India.
Got it. Perfect. I think let's talk about volumes. I mean, how is that reflecting on the volumes as well? I believe we have volumes of assignments are slowly picking up, but not closer to pre-pandemic levels. And assignments have become far more strategic in terms of how they are structured and how. I mean, we've seen a lot more increase in the short-term assignments between 1 to 6 months and business trips. I mean, people would go on business trips and then work remotely rather than having long-term STAs. At the same time, on the long-term assignments, we are seeing a reducing trend where it's only strategic moves only, which has, or whether revenue-generating moves only are the ones which are kind of going through. So, what's your broader reaction on this, Subbu, in terms of different kinds of moves and what you are seeing at your end?
No, I think it's perfect. Like the way how I see it and how the industry is moving towards. This largely may be the case, but not. I mean, it's not a definite sample, but definitely a kind of an example to say that largely this is how the industry is moving towards. Uh, have the numbers come to pre-pandemic? I would think no, because for the reasons like it's not maybe not entirely about the business requirement, but also about how we fine tune, how we optimize the way we use mobility. The reduction of travel that we can do as much and then utilize the technology that we have. I mean, the
Exactly.
video calling capability and the video conferencing may was there earlier. I mean, it's not that COVID invented that, but the utilization of that or the boom of that particular technology happened during that time. So, like we are doing today, so probably imagine 4 years back, Dharmesh, we would have been having this as a conference in one of the fancy hotels, right? And it may not be a webinar. So this is a kind of an adaptation that we have done, and that's working in the business level. So that obviously reduces the mobility, particularly the travels, which is quite avoidable, where you just want to meet the people face to face, which can be very well done now in this way. But otherwise, also the assignments, which are rather, I mean, see, there's a difference in terms of how mobility is used. It's like either you have a business travel or you have a short-term assignments which is mainly meant for transitions, and then you have a long-term assignments which are strategic, which are a permanent transfer, which are good, definitely meant for a long duration. But in between, what the organization started to do is to do a staff augmentation, like keep on rotating people, keeping the role constant there, but rotating people every 12 months to 18 months, which is like, you're not offshoring the work, you're not moving the work, but then you are just constantly supplying resources. I
Right.
think that's a model which is not very, was very not, I mean, that's been very widely used, but it's not the sustainable model or the right model for mobility, which I think is getting axed. I think that's a good move is what I think. But overall, I agree with all the points that's mentioned that that's the way the industry I look at it.
Chiru?
Exactly. I mean, but suppose I still like the fancy hotel setup versus webinar.
Anytime,
I know, but
anytime.
then yeah, that's not the viable option these days. No, I agree with all the points. I think the volume of assignments are not at pre-pandemic levels, and I don't think those will ever come, at least in the near future. That's my personal opinion. What we have seen is that the project-based travel, where this travel is linked to a project or revenue linked to a revenue generating opportunity, those we have seen. And then again, the short-term assignments, what I have seen, not a formal short-term assignment, but then again, kind of extended, business travel,
Yeah.
or maybe you may call it as, commuter assignments. Those are being kind of looked at whenever there is a need, rather than moving these, high-level executives for 2 years or 3 years to host location. That's one thing. And then again, remote work requests have been there, but again, those are very few, I would say.
Yeah.
I think there's a timely question on this one-way permanent transfers to India. I mean, there's a question from one of our participants that there's a discussion among the leading relocation companies in India is that they are seeing more Indians on assignments, short and long, especially from US and few from Europe, and not expats from other nationalities. Is this a trend or a sign of economic status of India today? So I think it's just adding to the point which I had, that seeing the India
Exactly.
growth, do you observe
Exactly.
more people wanting to come, more Indian nationals or people with PIO card wanting to come back to India to take up leadership roles, given the external
Yeah.
environment?
And then I think, even when you look at, culturally, right, they are much more closer to the culture on the ground, rather than having a, foreign national. That's one thing. And I think in the recent past, when you look at, maybe Subbu may have more visibility on that, when you look at remuneration and benefits, I think those are also at par. That's also, I think, another attraction.
No, definitely. So if for example, if people, the capability of the Indian organizations in India able to pay now, is also an attraction point, right? And particularly, I would say, if you're talking about leadership positions,
Yeah.
people at, for example, late 40s to 50s, where they have their children who are in a particular stage where they want them to be in India for whatever reason, for probably for an education, or for a job or anything. If that is the case, that's one of the drivers for people to come back to India, where they want to settle down for whatever reason. That really works in certain cases, and the ability for the organizations to be able to pay the kind of salary that will some way be attractive to them.
Right.
And if you still compare the same headcount sitting in the US or UK or Europe, and back in India, it's going to be definitely a lot cheaper for the organization. It's not going to be very cheap, or I mean, it's not that cheap, but then it's going to be definitely cost saving. I won't call it cheap, but then cost saving for the organization. It's a win-win in such cases.
Yeah.
So that kind of moments, but sorry, but if there is a trend, that's one of the agency that someone mentioned. It would be interesting for us to take a look, because it's a good trend to see, because so far I've not experienced or seen such kind of a huge migration or back migration.
Yeah. And just another point to think about, right? When you look at the healthcare costs in India versus Western countries, healthcare is much more affordable in India at that level. That's I feel that's one more factor which is driving, and also the lifestyle, right? So even there are these I would say softer factors which are also contributing to people coming back to India and take up these roles.
Great. Let me just give a quick update on the regulatory environment here as well. I think earlier we used to see a lot more income tax notices coming to assignees who are resident and ordinary resident in India, especially in terms of disclosing their foreign bank accounts or any foreign assets. I think that has over a period of time come down. ESOPs have been, we see separate disclosure on ESOPs in income tax returns as well. So I think data transparency and data management has become big in terms of income tax compliances these days. I mean, gathering of data through different sources by the income tax department. On the Provident Fund, there was an interesting judgment of a High Court to say that the whole issue of Provident Fund, applicability of Provident Fund on international workers may not be constitutional. But whereas there is also another contradicting judgment from another high court which says no, it's fine. So I think that this still remains an open topic where I think maybe the Supreme Court will finally come out with the answer as to whether the Provident Fund rules should be applied to international workers or not. I think the withdrawal of PF for foreign nationals post end of assignment still continues to be some challenge around that as well.
Exactly.
Chiru, you mentioned about some of the experience. You want to kind of share on that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things, right? One is, I mean, as simple as bank accounts, when the expats repatriate, maintaining the bank account, right? Especially when they don't have a visa, it's becoming more and more difficult. And then
Very
unless
painful.
you have the bank account, right, you don't get the refunds if there are any refunds. There are so many, such examples. And also, in terms of the withdrawal, right? Again, my personal point of view is that there is no consistency in the timelines.
Right.
Few may take like a couple of weeks, but then few I have seen couple of years still battling, and there is a difference of timelines between the different regional provident fund offices. So it's been still a struggle, I would say.
Right. A very unique issue. Yeah, sorry, you had to say something, Subbu?
I have one of my PF stuck
Okay.
within India.
Yeah, so on GST, which is goods and services tax, there's a very interesting issue which has come up on secondment arrangements, where the department takes a sorry, rather the businesses take a view that ultimately secondment is more like an employer-employee relationship and should be outside of the purview of GST rules and regulations. Whereas the department is taking a view, the government is taking a view that a secondment arrangement is actually a supply of manpower from parent to the subsidiary in India.
Exactly.
Therefore, a GST should apply. So I think on this also the verdict is out in the open as yet. I mean, but on a conservative basis, I think organizations are paying the GST and trying to see if they can take credit for that. I mean, so that's the current situation on that as well. So very interesting status as far as GST and PF both are concerned in today's times as things evolve.
GST is very interesting.
Yeah, and especially, again, at some point of time, maybe a couple of years back, they used to think that, assignments to India may be less expensive. But then now with the PF on international workers' compensation, right? The PF needs to be paid on the entire salary. And sometimes, some PF authorities have taken a stand that even you have to pay, you have to include the benefits as well. So if you include all those and then the PF and then employer contribution and then the gross ups on that, and again the GST, of course, may not be a mobility cost, but then that would definitely drive the cost up in bringing somebody right to India. So these have become much more costly these days, assignments to India.
It's interesting also whether the global mobility leaders and professionals include this thing items in their cost estimate when they give to business in terms of what's the cost of assignment, right? These are very challenging times that way.
Exactly.
In terms of if I were to hold a global mobility leader to the costs they provide, and then as a business, right, look at these additional costs coming my way, that would completely throw off my margin, right? I mean,
correct.
Exactly.
You'll not be able to make the right decision with that cost estimate.
Right. I mean, this provides.
And I think some countries where we have the COC agreements or the treaties where you will be able to save these PFs. For example, be it India to France or Germany, or France to India and the reverse. So where you have the treaty, but the problem there is the kind of treaties that we have does not fully cover the social security of both the countries.
Right.
It's mostly a partial agreement, but that's beneficial for India. But when you have the foreigner coming into India, because their social security is much broader, larger, and covering everything, so the pension, which is primarily the PF in India, will get covered in that.
Right. Very true. I mean, especially, things around, let's say, how the social security is impacting even the remote work requests, right? For example, like every country has come up with their own fancy visa, right, to allow you to go and do remote work in those countries. But the corresponding social security regulations in that country are still relevant for that. So while visa may make it easier, you still have challenges on cost about the social security compliances of working in those locations from an outbound perspective.
The nomad visas, kind of gained popularity maybe in year back or 2 years back, but I don't think we are hearing much about it
Yeah.
because the visa rules may have been kind of relaxed, right? But when we look at income tax, your social security tax, your payroll taxes, and then the
Permanent
corporate
establishment.
taxes, right? Yeah, PE, and then there hasn't been any change in those rules, so it gets very difficult.
Right.
Unless it becomes an amalgamation of all these
Exactly.
regulations together, it is impossible to have nomad.
Yeah.
And I think there's an important point also raised about company provided housing in India on corporate leases. I think there's a GST on that as well. So all of that
Yes.
things keep adding to your overall cost of
Yeah,
which
yeah.
otherwise you would have never included in your cost estimate earlier when you're showing to the
Right.
business. On the immigration front, I think the consular appointments are pretty streamlined now in terms of India. I think most appointments you're getting within 3 to 4 weeks, except of course for the fresh new B1 visa for US for somebody who's never traveled on B1 before. I think that's a long waiting time there. But other than that, I think across all consulates, we do see a very streamlining, and maybe within 4 to 6 weeks, you get your visa applications and stamping dates as well. Has that been the experience for you and as well, Subbu Chiru?
I think I mean, yeah, the B1 B2 is correct what you mentioned, but again, some of the consulates, for example, Hyderabad, I looked into it for something. It says, I think again, even for a Dropbox, to get an appointment, it says more than 500 days until unless you sit in the night and try to refresh it and try to get a slot. But on the face of it, yeah, I think a few consulates, a few offices, you have some availability, but I think still it's much better, but then still the problem persists. That's what I feel.
Right. Subbu, what about you?
No, I think I don't have much of a broader view on this because I'm not
Yeah.
very closer to the operations. But
Right.
I mean, when it comes to consular appointment, I can blindly agree to anything anybody says that it's not available. I would agree it's not available.
Okay.
That's
Doesn't
been the
surprise.
case. I've been
Yeah.
seeing this industry for over 20 years, and
Yeah.
that's something which never changed.
I mean, the maximum heat global mobility leaders face is about something which is like a process, which is visa, right? I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
the dates for themselves. So, okay, great. Thank you. Coming to the last aspect of our conversation today is about information technology, right? I mean, we are seeing now more and more tools available now with the market for with service partners focusing on our emerging areas like the remote working. So there's a separate tool of remote working now being manufactured and approached the service partners are approaching clients to kind of showcase their capabilities of how they can seamlessly approve remote work requests, how the tools can integrate with the larger HR tools in the organization. So what's been the larger focus now in terms of managing remote work through technology?
I
Uh,
I can I can give my
yeah, Chiru.
inputs, right? And then Subba, maybe I'll put you on spot with one question after that. Right. So I think what I'm hearing is that the remote work requests. I know the technologies are there provided by the vendors, but then that may cost a bomb. So again, based on what your policy, I think these remote work requests may be kind of tracked through Excels or maybe SharePoints. I don't know how many people are willing to invest that. And again, my question to Subbu is like, since you look into broader HR, and if somebody comes to you and saying that maybe mobility department comes to you and say that, hey, we need maybe 500,000 USD, or maybe three to 400,000 USD for some software. What would be your take on that? Because I feel you will have much more bigger needs, your HRIS systems and in HR technology. So what I'm trying to say that it may become very difficult to get the budgets.
For me, it's very simple. I'll refer them to finance, who will always decline everything.
See?
No, but yeah, so I think I mean now most companies, particularly in India, have built tools, even how small or shabby it is, to track the remote working. At least to capture that how many days people are coming into office or not. So, but I've not seen that happening in other countries. In the same organization, it does happen in India, but not in the other countries. So because I don't know, it's the cultural thing or it's the nature of it, or or the intent of the companies in India or the Indian nationals to be in the present in the office, or maybe the infrastructure that's already been put in, which has to be utilized. It's not that easy for the larger organizations to have invested so much in infrastructure and not use it, or even in a situation that you don't know how many people are coming into office today. How will you run the overheads? How will you run the canteen? How will you put anything there, even keep a water cooler there? So there are a lot of such logistical things. It's why people getting tracked, whether they come to office or not. But when it comes to mobility is concerned, I don't know. I mean, this again circle backs to the same point of as our remote working, whether how much of that is going to really work for mobility. Maybe they are in the country, they are assigned to India. For example, a foreigner is assigned to India, whether the person is sitting in the office or working from home, does not really matter, right? As long as the geographical boundary is what mobility will be concerned about. But then coming to office or not, or tracking that kind of return to office is something what broader as an HR, which we would take.
Right. I think in terms of the challenges which mobility leaders face today is, of course, continue the integration of their processes with the larger HR tools, because HR also are going through their own set of maturity cycle about
Right.
using new tools and technologies to address larger challenges. I think one or two skills which all global mobility leaders and maybe senior managers in mobility space need to kind of upskill themselves is about data analytics and data management, because I think data visualization is becoming more and more relevant in terms of how you manage your stakeholders. And a big part of how we can use good data visualization tools is about trying to understand how to really manage the database properly to accurately reflect on your dashboards. At the same time, how you analyze that data in terms of making finer strategic inputs to your leadership. I think that's something which I've been seeing in last couple of years becoming more and more relevant since the COVID days. That there's an increasing amount of reporting and dashboards to the leadership, for the HR leadership as well. And that somewhere actually has its own requirement to have these kind of skills in place from a mobility team perspective.
Right. Absolutely. I think I see that's a very
Agree.
positive move, because data is something is fundamental. It's become fundamental now, and everything is driven through that. So organizations moving towards that direction is good. Integrating the processes is good as well, because that's another problem we must have seen in our entire career, that the systems does not talk to each other, which is increasingly becoming more less now, because the systems get integrated, which is a good thing. Even when we implemented tools or a mobility solution from outside, it's from a vendor, they have a very clear plan of how that will get integrated to your HRIS. Your payroll data goes from here to there. There's a lot of data comes from there to here. The basic information, the PI, SPI goes from the HRIS to the mobility tool. So all of that integration is already thought through, and then it's coming as a package. So which is very good.
Exactly. Right.
Right. I think we have overrun a bit, but I would definitely want to talk about this last point about, using of generative AI in GM processes and assigning experience. I mean, we read a lot about how HR, is now starting to use generative AI and artificial intelligence to track employee experience or to track hiring experience. Significant, and it's giving them significant, productivity by using those tools. Are we seeing some of these tools coming over to mobility space for us also to do a similar, let's say, tracking of them assigning experience as well? Chiru, can I start with you on that?
Yeah. So I know, there are, a lot of, I would say, advantages, right? But then I don't think, we are seeing much on that area. But what I have seen is that, in terms of risk management, AI can analyze your, geopolitical situations and health and safety data and provide you real-time updates. That's we are witnessing, but I haven't seen much. Proactively using the generative AI yet. But of course, there are, with the Gen AI, you can kind of simplify your processes and basically, provide that, virtual reality simulations if required. There are a lot of uses, but then I think we are still kind of trying to learn.
Subbu?
Yeah, definitely. I think the technology itself has been very, I think mobility was one of the functions to automate certain things from a very early stage, but then it is like a lot of things were processed. Like, for particularly immigration process is something what we've been trying to automate because that's a painful one. That's the most painful one. That's
A
the
lot of paperwork.
biggest,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of paperwork, and that's the biggest in terms of operations for most companies. So many companies adopted to technology, bringing a tool either in-house or outside. But then when it comes to AI, I think we are still naive there. HR as a larger, trying to adapt to that, like you said, hiring, where we can also utilize that a lot in the L&D. So we are exploring, and I would still say that AI is a buzzword, and everyone has to say something about AI, or at least use AI 5 times a day. That's a kind of policy everyone has now. But then, are we doing that much? I don't know. Like, at least we are thinking that much, which is good. So, but yeah, when it comes to mobility, I think we will take some more time to see the scope. For that, Chiru mentioned pretty good, scope of implementation. I think, yeah, we should. I mean, whatever comes as a technology which is going to help us make our lives easier, not only us, and also for the employees as an experience, which is where we should focus on.
Great. Thank you. This is great inputs, both Subbu and Chiru. You had something to add here.
Just want to add one point, right? I mean, technology is good, right? But again, mobility and relocation is highly associated with the human emotions, right?
Right.
So that it is highly important that we have a human touch, right? Subject matter expert in the process, rather than having a purely tech-driven approach, right? So mobility is a function where we should be joined by technology advancements and the human element. I think that's at the end of the day, that's the core of mobility, I would say.
Plus it comes with a lot of legalities. So and also combination of the home and the host country, which is not going to be the same everywhere. So that kind of an intelligence which has to go in and then build something which is more meaningful.
Got it. Perfect. I think we will end on that note. I mean, I have a very tough question put across as to what do you see of global mobility in 2030. I think we should have that as a topic of a webinar when we kind of come next, because I think last 3 years with the way global mobility has transformed, I think it's becoming increasingly difficult to predict global mobility 1 year from now as well. So on that note, I just want to thank both Chiru and Subbu for your time and commitment to be part of this webinar and share your experience and your thoughts as to where we are heading. I want to also thank all the participants who registered, and this has been an extremely interactive sessions with a lot of comments from the participants. So I'm really thankful to them as well. Just want to call out one last thing is about our next webinar, as I mentioned earlier. It's on the ESG and the role of global mobility. It's on 22nd of July at 3 p.m. Singapore General Time. So where Sean Collins who leads the ESG committee at ATMA, will have a conversation with Stephen Park from Schneider Electric. So I would encourage all of you to register and attend that to kind of update yourselves on how ESG has an impact on global mobility policy and processes. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much today for joining us, and look forward to you in the next webinar. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Dharmesh. Thank you,
Have a good
Chiru.
day.
Thank you, everyone.
Right. Thanks, Subbu. Bye.